Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to a special edition of the Retro Gamers. Larry here.
And Anthony here. And I have a question before we get started.
Sir, yes, sir.
Have we been around long enough to have any kind of special editions?
Listen, you're lucky we're not doing a flashback episode. All right.
No, that's next week.
It's a special edition in my eyes because it is, or actually at this point with it broadcasting, it was SummerSlam weekend, WWE SummerSlam, and from both of us from Brooklyn, they're doing a huge 3 shows in a row. Well, 3 shows and a concert in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center. And
I'm having flashbacks.
And me and you know, we huge wrestling fans, and one of the things that got us to be friends back in the beginning, back in the day. In fact, I remember distinctly, it was, I think you had WWF Raw for the Super Nintendo.
Oh, wait, is that how I got stuck with you?
Well, it was actually the yearbook in high school, but beyond that, it was.
I don't know what you're talking about. I was too cool to be on yearbook.
So, and it was Raw. I remember I went to your house with a friend of ours, Danny. Went to your house, played the game, went home, got mugged on the way home.
Yes, I remember that story.
So that was fun, and that was the first time I met you and went over your house, actually. So not the first time I met you, but when I went over your house.
That's all. Well, those were also back in the days when you could walk home.
Yeah. I had a backpack.
And then look what happened.
I had a backpack full of video games, and those idiots just wanted whatever dollars I had in my pocket. Thank God they didn't go in my backpack.
Yes, thank God.
And here we are 20-something years later, so...
Yeah, but I'm still regretting it.
But as much as we enjoyed wrestling, whether it be WWE, WCW, whatever it was, wrestling did have a big impact on video games. And some of the early games, even if they weren't licensed with a company like WWE or anybody, still some of the best games on the old systems.
Very true.
I mean, let's go all the way back to the first one, Pro Wrestling, one of the original black box cartridges for the Nintendo.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, everybody who played Nintendo, or at least knew of, if not played pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is the pro wrestling game is also synonymous with that famous saying that I'm always saying, which is "a winner is you."
There you go, and it was.
Some things get lost in translation.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh my God, forget about it. It was a solid game for what it's worth. For back then, for the moves you can do, for the gameplay, for the graphics, for the Nintendo.
Oh, yeah.
The game, pro wrestling rocked.
I know, and who didn't want to play as Starman?
Not only that, but there is, and I know no one listens to this podcast, so I'm sure I'm not going to get them into trouble, but Pro Wrestling Syndicate, which comes out of New Jersey, mostly Rahway, New Jersey. One of their superstars is Starman.
Oh God! And does he have the exact same
full outfit? Yes.
That is awesome.
I don't know if he's still there.
And sad at the same time.
He was. I caught a few shows with Starman there. It was pretty. He walks out all like straight laced and everything like that, like a Nintendo character. It's so funny.
Oh God! Does he do the spin kick?
I think he did. Yeah. Then he got his butt kicked, and then that was it. So
a winner is not him.
But, with this whole SummerSlam weekend upon us, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, they all had some great games. And what are some of the games that you remember, some of the wrestling games that you quite enjoyed? And I'm sure, I hate to say it, I'm not, yes, everyone knows on my other podcast, more of the same. And I'm more into WWE than anybody else. But WWE was the ones that had most of the games out early on. I think WCW had one game.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to go back a little bit further than pro wrestling, because if I remember correctly, I mean, yes, NES was one of the first ones, but I also remember playing the first WWF wrestling game on Commodore 64.
Oh gosh, yes.
Which was on those big floppy disks, and it was two-sided. And on one side you had Hulk Hogan versus Macho Man Randy Savage. And on the other side, it was Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff, and that was it. That was literally all it was. And what they did was they had very, very grainy still images from these two matches that took place on TV in the mid 80s or earlier 80s. And you basically had a list of choices to make on what move you wanted to. First off, you picked who you wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And then you, if I remember correctly,
who didn't want to be Hogan?
Well, me. I was never a Hogan fan. I'm like the only person. I was a Savage fan through and through.
Not even Paul Orndorff? You would pick Paul Orndorff?
Well, see, I'm trying to remember. I think you were able to pick the other side. But regardless, the whole point of the game was you were given options on what move you wanted to do, and then the game would decide, I guess, based on whatever move the computer chose, what move would win based on the two, and then you kept going until somebody won the match. But it was literally all still images that would pop up. So it was really interesting, and it was my first foray into playing a wrestling game that was that felt a little realistic because I was choosing the moves. Which was great. And then, of course, the NES games, which were great. Pro wrestling really made wrestling on NES bearable because the WrestleMania game that originally came out was awful.
That was a tough one to play. I mean, it was the only really one out there, but you're right. Compared to pro wrestling, even though you had the names like Hogan, Heinz Man, and all them.
Yeah, but it was very arcade-like. That was the problem with that game. All you did was punch and kick until the guy fell down, and you pinned him, and that was the end of it.
And you had those the weird power-ups in the back of the ring.
Yep, exactly. I mean, they got better with the next game when they came out with WrestleMania Challenge, where you actually got to lock up and do a move and stuff like that, and then they added, obviously, more modes. You had single, you had tag team, you had Survivor Series, 3-on-3, which was kind of cool. And then, to your point, the WCW game that was on.
It was WCW Tag Team Wrestling, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think you're right. At least on the NES.
Yeah.
But by far, I remember, the game I played most, at least NES wise for WWF, had to be that WrestleMania Challenge one. That and pro wrestling.
Yeah, and I wish I kind of a little bit
remember
of
Muscle.
Yes, I know. Hold on, I remember of the video game. I don't think I've ever played the game, but those dumb little figures. I definitely had a ton of those little pink figures.
Oh no, I remember playing the Muscle video game. The rest of it was so much fun.
Did you collect the figures as well, the little ones?
I did collect the figures. I didn't have a whole lot of them, but I do remember collecting them.
And then the belt.
But also, once WWF had their own figures, it's like, who needed Muscle figures?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because they also towered over the Muscle figures.
Exactly.
Something in me kind of wish that pro wrestling was part of the mini NES, because it's not licensed. Yeah, there's no real guys in it, so... But maybe one day they'll release it on the virtual. It's not even on the virtual console, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So I have seen it at a couple of flea markets though, and I keep meaning to buy it just for the sake of buying it. Just to have the cart.
I think I own it. I think I still have it.
Yeah,
I got to go through. When my friend was visiting from New York last week, he wanted to see my retro games, so I actually. I pulled them out and went through them, and I thought I saw pro wrestling in there. I was actually very surprised, and this has nothing to do with this podcast, but I was very surprised to find that my Nightmare on Elm Street NES cartridge is missing.
Oh,
and I need to get that now.
Maybe to your dream world.
I don't know where it is, but I need to buy a new one because the fact that it's not in my collection actually breaks my heart.
Better go out to that. What was that name of that store out there?
Oh, Game Dude.
Game Dude, yeah.
Game Dude. Holy cow, that place is a warehouse. I love it.
$60.
Well, they actually, when I went there last week, I did see it on the list, and I think it was like $35 or $40.
All right, cheaper than I thought it would be.
Yeah. So,
but anyway, look out for it as well. They got the flea markets out here. So
yeah, whenever you go flea marketing, please let me know because I will gladly send you money for any games that I
saw.
Buy.
That's what it was. I mean, I haven't gone this year. The weather's been kind of bad, but I think it was last year. I saw pro wrestling. I think I texted you, and you're like, "Oh, either you said you had it or you saw it somewhere near yourself or something like that."
No, actually, I think when I was in New York, I went to a flea market upstate with my family.
Oh, that's
somebody had NES games, and I remember buying 2 games, and I could swear pro wrestling was one of them.
So, and I don't know why. Just again, because I own ET. I don't have an Atari, but I have the cart just on display. So next time if I see it, I'll find it. So
I own 2 ETs.
But the thing I didn't like about WrestleMania Challenge was that's where it started with the ring on that quarter turn angle.
Oh yeah, it was like a diamond.
Yeah, it looked.
Weird.
It was weird because then you weren't running up and down. You were running northwest, southeast. It was It was kind of confusing. But then Nintendo came out. And then they had King of the Ring for Nintendo.
Yes, that was like one of the very last games to come out on the system because if you remember at that time, I mean, I think Super Nintendo had been out for years by the time King of the Ring came out because King of the Ring came out, I think, in like 93, 94.
Around there, because I think it was either that or because it was also Steel Cage Challenge that was on.
Steel Cage Challenge came out before King of the Ring.
Okay, so King of the Ring was the last one.
King of the Ring was officially the last one because Nintendo, I don't remember when they stopped making games, but that was by far one of the last
Probably,
ones.
yeah, I think definitely one of the last. I don't remember.
And I own that. I definitely own that one.
Actually, King of the Ring I played. Steel Cage Challenge I didn't play much of.
Well, the concept of King of the Ring was just awesome. You had a tournament.
Oh, totally. No, it worked. It was the only thing I hated about it was Bret Hart was on the cover. But nowadays.
Well, of course he was. He won the first King of the Ring.
He's a 2-time King of the Ring, even before it was a pay-per-view. And then of course we switched to Super Nintendo. That's where really the games, in my opinion, started picking up speed. And again, it's more WWE. I don't really remember WCW being on Super Nintendo.
Oh, you don't remember WCW Super Brawl?
Oh no! I mean, no, I do now, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I had that game. That game was great.
Did you?
I loved that game. Yeah, because I remember like
I don't think I ever played it.
When you were choosing your wrestlers on the screen, they would randomly pop up out of their little squares and do their thing. So like Ric Flair would pop out and woo, and Sting would do his, and the reason why I remember those is because of all the guys that would do that in that game. Rick Steiner would pop out, and the line they gave him made no sense in the game because he would pop out of his screen and he would go, "It's not my fault," and I'm like, what does that even mean? I don't get it. I'm pretty sure it was him.
It was an early Snitsky gimmick.
That's probably where.
God, Super Bowl! I forgot about Super Bowl. Boy,
and also, don't forget one of my favorites on Super Nintendo, Saturday Night Slam Masters.
I was going to say, they weren't only WWE wrestling games. Saturday Night Slam Master was one of the non-licensed wrestling games that was by far... And it was a spin-off, if you will, of Final Fight, because Hagar was in it.
Yep, that's right. Well, it was a Capcom game, right?
Yes.
And that's why Hagar could be in it.
Yeah, well, he was... with him in Final Fight, that he was the mayor of Metro City, who was a former wrestler, and his moves in Final Fight were like pile driver and stuff like that. So, Saturday Night and it has that... There may have been someone else, actually, from Final Fight in Saturday Night Slam Masters. But it definitely had the game... what's the word I'm looking for? Look of Final Fight, just in a wrestling game. So, but that was probably the... next to pro wrestling, one of the best non-licensed wrestling games.
I will agree with you there.
Because, and you had some bad ones, like later on, like on PlayStation, The Simpsons Wrestling, which was not fun at all.
No. Backyard Wrestling wasn't fun either. Oh,
God, Backyard Wrestling, horrible. Who would do Backyard Wrestling?
Losers.
Honestly. Those games were no fun, and neither was watching the DVDs after a while. But Raw...
I don't know what you're talking about.
Actually, before we get to Raw, easily Super WrestleMania, I think they called it. Yeah, Super WrestleMania was
Super WrestleMania
fantastic.
laid the groundwork for Raw,
and that had a really cool Survivor Series mode. I think it was 3-on-3. I don't think it was 4-on-4. It may have been 4-on-4, and you have to cycle through everyone. Now, what was cool about Super WrestleMania, besides the 16-bit graphics, better sound, you had some newer new age characters for back then, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, name others. I remember, and I don't know if I was with you when this happened, but only once in my lifetime, I actually somehow got the Undertaker to choke somebody. It was not a move. Do you ever remember this? It was not a move that was in the instruction booklet. I did it once, and I knew he was choking him because he reared back with his hand and choked the guy. I think the referee came over to make me break it. Only once. I could never replicate that again, and I've always tried to do it again. I guess you weren't with me when that happened.
No, I guess not.
Hopefully I wasn't sleeping when it happened. But beyond that, though, Super WrestleMania laid the groundwork for awesome Super Nintendo games. Then you got to Royal Rumble, which eventually led us to Raw. And Raw, by far, is probably one of the best
Raw was by far the best. Well, no question about it. because whether you owned it on Genesis or Super Nintendo, it was just a great game.
And I think it was Royal Rumble was the first one that was both on Super Nintendo and Genesis with slightly different rosters. I'm
trying to remember who was different.
I think the Ultimate Warrior, was on Genesis, if I remember. Not on Super Nintendo. Or maybe the British Bulldog.
Oh. I think you're right. I think the Bulldog was on Genesis only.
Yeah, I remember because they had, they did have a, definitely a different roster. Almost like we're on SmackDown Live nowadays. Different rosters, slightly. And then Raw, the biggest thing was, remember the 32X version of Raw had the character Quang.
Yep, and I remember in my own folly buying the 32X specifically just to try out that version with Quang, and boy was that a waste of money.
Savio Vega, who wanted him? But I think the Super Nintendo, the Genesis version. I don't think I've ever actually really owned a Genesis wrestling game, even when I had the Genesis. It was mostly the Super Nintendo that I clung on to. And then, of course, like we talked about a few weeks ago, SmackDown was the whole reason why I bought a PlayStation, the very first WWF SmackDown game. Because that really, even to step it up even further into the 3D, CD quality music and stuff like that. And SmackDown was a solid game on the PlayStation.
Yeah, SmackDown was definitely a great game. I think it was the SmackDown series was definitely far superior to Raw because Raw and Attitude, although they were great games on those systems, it was that whole it was kind of like that whole arcade thing where you had to do combinations to get moves to go off, and it was just very clunky. Yes,
I remember Attitude was a bit clunky. Just the way the game mechanics were. I kind of enjoyed more, if you remember, WrestleMania, the arcade game, and In Your House.
Yeah, I didn't like those that much.
See, those were goofy fantasy games that were just fun. They were really fun in the arcade. I think they transferred well on the PlayStation, not so much the version on Super Nintendo, but the PlayStation versions worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember owning them, and to be honest with you, I think I may have owned them on the PC instead of the PlayStation. I just didn't really enjoy them very much.
Yeah, they were like a novelty, really.
Yeah. PlayStation for me, though, I think the big one, I mean, the SmackDown series, of course, but before that, there was WCW versus the World.
Yes.
And I remember how awesome that game was because there were so many wrestlers in that game, and then there were hidden ones that you can unlock. It was the first time they ever did something like that, and it was just awesome.
Yeah, and that also laid the groundwork for games later on. Probably the best wrestling game of all time, No Mercy, on N64.
Yes.
That's because that was
WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy were probably two of the best wrestling games of all time.
What company was that? Jax? No, that wasn't Jax. That was
that was UK's.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, because first it was WCW versus the World, then WCW versus NWO. There was one on Revenge was on Super Nintendo, but there was also an NWO.
No. Revenge.
Oh no, Revenge was N64.
No. N64 was WCW NWO World Tour.
Yes.
And then WCW NWO Revenge.
That's right. I thought there was an NWO game.
And then WWE went over to that company.
Yes, that's right.
And wound up doing WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy.
No Mercy, and I like there's something about No Mercy I like better than WrestleMania 2000, but those two games on N64 were probably the best, in my opinion, the best wrestling games ever on any system.
Yeah, hands down. I mean, I think almost every wrestling fan looks back on those fondly as the best ones ever. They never seem to be able to top those.
Yeah, not yet. They tried to on GameCube. They tried to replicate the gameplay a little bit with
WrestleMania 18, 19, those.
Actually, more Day of Reckoning.
Oh, Day of Reckoning.
Day of Reckoning, yeah. Didn't quite pan out as good, but still. And then going back to PlayStation, WCW. Then they started doing WCW Nitro wasn't too bad. I enjoyed Nitro on PlayStation. Then they started getting wacky with Mayhem and Backstage Assault, which had no ring. It was just all backstage brawls.
Yeah, that game wasn't that good.
And that was leading towards the end of WCW anyway in 2001. So.
Very true.
But what was cool about Mayhem, and did they do? No, it was either Nitro or Mayhem. When there was a WCW pay-per-view, you can actually put in a code in the game to replicate the pay-per-view card, and it would just pull right up.
Really?
Yeah. It didn't last long, but
Wow.
yeah, like Halloween Havoc, and if you put in the code, whatever the card was for Halloween Havoc on TV would be the card you can play on the system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was something different. So, but then then WCW died out, and then Nintendo, WWE kept going bigger and better, and then of course moving on to the games we have today, which now you can scan your face in and put in your own music and stuff like that. But let's not forget, WrestleMania 2000 was so customizable that you ended up customizing the entrance of the video game.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you changed the way that Superstars looked, it translated into the opening of the game, which was awesome. But that was also back in the day when the wrestling games started to have like openings. You know what I mean? Like now when you buy a wrestling game, it goes straight to the start screen and you move in and all that stuff. Now, back then it was really cool to see like the open with the music and like, just montage of stuff going on.
Oh yeah, they just pretty much
super fun.
Replicating, what the show opening almost was. And if I may steer off a little bit from home consoles, I mean WrestleFest.
WrestleFest is by far one of my most favorite wrestling games of all time, period.
Definitely. And what was the other one?
WrestleMania Challenge? No. There was the one before that. Or was it just Superstars?
Superstars. I think it was Superstars, yeah.
Superstars.
I mean, I remember more WrestleFest. And those two arcade... I would pay so much money for those... Well, for the arcade games. But for them to come out on a home console somehow, because those were so much fun. You had the one where the tag team tournament and Legion of Doom was the last tag team you had to take on. And then just the sprites were just so bright. And it was... WrestleFest. It was an arcade by me around the corner from my house. It's now a two-family home, but it used to be an arcade, and the only reason why I went there was WrestleFest. I mean, it was the only place that I knew of that was around us before we got Fun Time.
Wait, where was that place?
Literally, it was right on the corner, right before you turn onto the avenue to get to my block.
Yeah,
right on Garrison Avenue. It was right near the end there. Someone just built a home. It literally just was a gutted home that they turned into an arcade place. It lasted for like a year.
Oh wow! I remember where I played WrestleFest was at there was a pizzeria. I think it was right on Avenue U. I think a block off of Nostrand. I think it was on like Herring Street or Brown Street, and they had WrestleFest. Okay. So I would walk the very long 3 blocks to go down there and play it.
What about remember Buddies?
Oh God, yeah.
I think that had
Buddies.
there as well.
Jeez.
With the burger
Did it?
next to it. Yeah.
The only one I remember is the one on Avenue U.
Oh, good. 2 seconds.
Well, apparently somebody doesn't know how to silence their cell phone.
It was my landline. I'm like the last person with a landline.
Oh yeah, that's a great story, Grandpa. But yeah, I mean, wrestling games are constantly. I don't think I've ever gotten rid of any of my wrestling games, or if I did, I've purchased them. I bought them back really, really quickly. Exactly. So I have so many of them in my collections. They
were fun, and then ECW had a couple there, which just basically was almost like mirror images of the WWE versions of Attitude and Raw.
Well, yeah, because they went with, I think that was Acclaim.
Yeah, it was Acclaim.
And they went with them, and they basically just reskinned those and made them ECW, which was a good play at the time for them, because that was the company that didn't have a wrestling license, but at the same time, superior games came out, so nobody really wanted to go backwards.
Yeah, and ECW, you're right, started picking up steam, and I think it was Anarchy Rules, I think was the first one. And then I think it was November to Remember, or Hardcore Heaven was the next one after that.
No, I thought it was, wasn't it like ECW Revolution or something?
Oh, yeah, Extreme Revolution, that's right, yes.
Extreme Revolution.
Yes, and then Anarchy Rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were cool, because they were, ECW, they were... hardcore wrestling, and that was the first game, one of the first games to introduce the barbed wire matches and flaming tables and stuff, and, back then on a video game, like, whoa, this is pretty wild stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, remember the import that we played for a while, Fire Pro Wrestling.
Fire Pro Wrestling G, loved that game. I don't think you would ever see... you would see a collection of superstars, even though they weren't named. You know, they weren't named WWF or WCW, but they recreated them really well.
Did.
And they were the first game to really introduce like the whole aspect of like pacing and timing and breathing when you're in a game. Like you would actually get fatigued for doing moves too quickly, like back to back to back to back, which was really interesting. It really made the matches feel so much more real when you were playing them.
No, totally. And I know that they released Fire Pro Wrestling eventually on PlayStation 2, but the original import that we got was probably one of the first imports. Probably one of the first imports that you got for the PlayStation? Because that was an imported game.
It was one of the first wrestling imports I got. I mean, okay. I only had a handful of imports, but yeah, that was I think the first one I bought because I remember I was working at a video store at the time, and I had ordered it through them.
There you go.
To get it, yeah, because I didn't know how else to get it because the magic of the internet was still in its youth.
Oh yeah, totally. Al Gore
so there wasn't really a whole lot of shopping yet invented.
Not much. But wrestling games, as much as game systems, I think will be around. They do stand the test of time, a lot of them. And with this weekend that we had, with NXT, with SummerSlam, Raw happening tonight. If you're downloading this show right now, I think it's. Wrestling definitely has those games have a place. I think even if you're not a wrestling fan nowadays, you've played one of these games, and I'm sure you've owned a wrestling game at some point. So I think everyone can kind of come together on those.
Yes, no question.
And with that, I think we're going to start to end this special edition of the Retro Gamer, at least with wrestling. And
remind me before we end this though. How many wrestling games were on the Virtual Boy?
And with that being said, we're going to start to wrap this up. There would have been. There was a boxing game, actually.
Yeah, there would have been if anybody bought the damn thing.
With that, follow us on our Facebook page, Retro Gamers Podcast. More 365 for me on Twitter. Matsusu28 on Twitter for Anthony. And with that, everyone, have a good one. Catch you guys later.
Good night, guys.